Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado sits in a beautiful valley surrounded by breathtaking mountain scenery. But under the beauty lies some difficult truths. The territory was once home to the Fort Lewis Indian Boarding School, where the state investigation revealed at least 31 Native students died and were buried in unmarked graves. The college also used to be home to plaques at the center of campus that celebrated purported positive effects of Indian boarding schools in language campus leaders call whitewashing. In 2019, things began to change.
It really was the urging of students and faculty who came to leadership and pointed out the harm that creates, and leadership listened, and we formed what we called the Fort Lewis History Committee, and that was made up of various faculty and staff from across campus who began to look at our history more in depth and to make recommendations about how we move forward and begin a process of reconciliation.
So on our clock tower at Fort Lewis College, we had panels depicting the boarding school era that said students learned valuable skills. And we had Indigenous faculty a former student, Dr. Jocelyn Lee, who sent me an email saying, I walk by this every day, how can this be on our campus? And she was right to call the question.
The school decided to remove the plaques and in 2021 did so with direction from tribal leaders. But more still needed to be done.
And then 2 years ago, we really didn't think that was far enough, and working with the Ute Mountain Ute and Southern Ute, came together on campus to propose a bill, to form a bill that would look at trauma and potential student deaths that happened at Fort Lewis Indian Boarding School. You cannot heal, you cannot look forward with clear eyes unless you know what you're looking back at.
The bill they pushed became law and directed state historians to investigate boarding school history. The subsequent report details abuses and degradations that occurred at Colorado's 9 federal Indian boarding schools that operated between 1880 and 1920. It lists more than 30 student deaths at the Grand Junction Indian Boarding School and archival records on at least 31 students who died at Fort Lewis. The report comes against the backdrop of a similar federal inquiry. In 2022, the Department of the Interior released its findings on the impact of the boarding school era nationally.
This is long overdue. As an Indigenous person, I fully understand that confronting these histories is long overdue, but I also fully believe that we are in a time where it has never been more important to be honest and transparent about our histories and to be responsible and accountable to those histories and how we reconcile that.
The Fort Lewis Cemetery sits on a small, unmarked and fenced-off plot on a large site that is mostly an agricultural and teaching facility. Ground-penetrating images reveal that the site holds 46 graves consistent with those of children. That's more than the 31 student deaths that show up in the archives. Given the complexity of the site, there are more than 400 people buried there. The true number of student deaths may never be known.
This report really is kind of a final product, but even with all the information that we did gather and that we did see, we haven't been through everything. And then also in a lot of ways, I think there's still a lot of questions. We tried to make a really thorough report. But we did have a condensed timeline, and I think as a researcher, I have more questions.
But question marks aren't stopping Fort Lewis.
For us, as an institution, the fact that any child died at Fort Lewis Indian Boarding School, even one, is too many, and that we have a responsibility. And for us, that responsibility is to creating a better educational experience for Indigenous students who are at our institution now.
One way they are working on that is turning the land under the old boarding school into a center of healing, connecting ancestral ways with students of today.
I think our traditional garden that we have here is a great example of reclamation of this educational space, from this very painful history and past to a space that centers Indigenous knowledge and contributes to healthier thriving Indigenous students and communities.
What's next for the student ancestors buried at Fort Lewis? That's for Native leaders to decide.
From here, tribes take the lead.
The school's Tribal Advisory Council is scheduled to meet again in November and start the discussions.
I think for the nation, this remains a critical conversation to begin a process of reconciliation and healing for Indigenous people and for tribal nations, so that we provide an opportunity for our communities to heal, and more importantly, to thrive. I think for us, at the end of the day, children aren't meant to die at school, period.
In Durango, Colorado, Stuart Huntington, ICT News.